Tonight, a woman will witness the marriage of the man who betrayed her. She's wearing the dress she intended for her own wedding, and before dawn breaks, she'll agree to marry the city's most dangerous crime boss, all for revenge. This is a story of betrayal, power, and a sham marriage becoming the only real thing. Watch until the end. Like. And comment the name of the city you're watching in so I know how far this story has progressed. Rain came down like nails against the windows of the Blackstone ballroom, each gust of wind rattling the glass hard enough to make the chandeliers tremble. Serafina Vale stood just inside the entrance, water still dripping from the hem of her emerald dress, her fingers numb around the small clutch she'd been gripping too tight for the past 20 minutes. She shouldn't have come. Every rational part of her brain had screamed at her to stay home, to delete the invitation from her inbox, to pretend she'd never received it at all. But rational wasn't the part of her that had won tonight. The ballroom stretched out before her like a cathedral built for cruelty. White roses covered every surface, hanging from the ceiling in heavy clusters, wrapped around marble columns, spilling across tables in arrangements so excessive they looked like they were drowning in their own beauty. The air smelled like money and perfume, and something faintly metallic that made her stomach twist. Beneath the flowers, beneath the champagne, and the low hum of a string quartet, the room buzzed with whispers. She heard her name before she even took 5 steps inside. That's her. I can't believe she actually showed up. God, that dress. Isn't that the same one she wore to... Serafina didn't turn her head. She kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, and forced herself to walk deeper into the room, even though every instinct in her body was begging her to turn around and run. The emerald silk clung to her skin in all the places it used to fit better, back when she'd bought it with trembling hands and a heart full of stupid hope. Back when she thought Roman DeLuca was going to be the man she married. That was 14 months ago. Now Roman was standing at the altar at the far end of the ballroom, his hand resting on the lower back of a woman in a white gown so extravagant it looked like it had been designed to erase every other bride who'd ever existed. Celeste Arden. Long golden hair swept into some kind of intricate updo that probably cost more than Serafina's rent. A face so perfectly made up it didn't look real. She was laughing at something Roman had just whispered in her ear, her head tilted back, her hand resting on his chest like she owned him. Maybe she did now. Serafina's chest tightened so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Celeste had been her best friend once. The kind of best friend you tell everything to. The kind you trust with your secrets, your fears, your engagement ring when you need someone to hold it while you wash your hands at a restaurant. The kind of friend who smiles at you over brunch and tells you she's so happy for you, that Roman is perfect for you, that you're going to have the most beautiful wedding. And then she'd slept with him. Not once. Not some drunken mistake at a party. No. It had been going on for 7 months before Serafina found out. 7 months of lies and secret texts in hotel rooms paid for with Roman's credit card while Serafina planned a wedding that was never going to happen. She'd found out the way every humiliated woman finds out in the end, by accident. A notification on Roman's phone while he was in the shower. A message from Celeste that started with, "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby," and ended with an emoji Serafina couldn't even look at without wanting to vomit. She'd confronted them both the same night. Roman had barely tried to deny it. He'd looked at her with those dark eyes she used to think were warm and said, "I didn't plan for this to happen, Sarah, but it did, and I can't keep pretending anymore." Celeste had cried, actually cried, said she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt her, that sometimes love just happens and you can't control it. As if love was some kind of natural disaster neither of them could have avoided. Serafina had walked out of Roman's penthouse that night and never went back. The breakup had been private at first, just her and Roman and Celeste and the wreckage of a friendship that used to mean something. But then the engagement announcement hit the society pages 6 weeks later. Roman DeLuca and Celeste Arden. Chicago's golden couple. A merger of 2 powerful families with old money and older secrets. The kind of wedding that made the front page of every lifestyle magazine in the city. And Serafina became the woman no one wanted to talk about anymore. The whispers started immediately. Poor Serafina. She must have done something to push him away. Maybe she wasn't enough for him. Maybe she was too much. Maybe she was boring in bed or too focused on her career or too damaged from her childhood or not pretty enough or too needy or not affectionate enough or The rumors didn't matter. What mattered was that Chicago's elite had already decided she was the problem. Not Roman, not Celeste, her. And once that decision was made, the erasure was swift and absolute. Invitations stopped coming, friends stopped calling. Even her own mother had suggested gently that maybe it was time for Serafina to think about moving to a different city for a fresh start. As if running away would fix the fact that everyone she'd ever trusted had decided she wasn't worth keeping. So she'd come tonight. She didn't know why. Maybe to prove she wasn't broken. Maybe to show them all that she could stand in the same room as Roman and Celeste and not fall apart. Maybe because some sick part of her needed to see it with her own eyes. Needed to watch the man she'd loved marry the woman who'd destroyed her. Or maybe she was just a masochist. The ceremony started 10 minutes later. Serafina stood at the back of the room near a column wrapped in roses, her arms crossed over her chest, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. She watched Roman take Celeste's hand, watched him smile at her the way he used to smile at Serafina, watched the officiant say words about love and commitment, and forever like those words still meant something. When Roman slipped the ring onto Celeste's finger, Serafina felt something inside her chest snap clean in half. She turned and walked out before anyone could see her face. The rain hit her the second she stepped outside, cold and brutal and exactly what she deserved. She didn't have an umbrella, didn't have a coat, didn't have a plan beyond getting the hell out of that ballroom before she did something humiliating like cry in front of 200 people who already thought she was pathetic. She walked fast, her heels clicking against the wet pavement, her dress soaked through within seconds. The streets were empty. Most of downtown Chicago had already shuttered for the night, the storefronts dark, the sidewalks slick with rain. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. She just needed to move, needed to put distance between herself and that ballroom and the wreckage of her life. She made it 3 blocks before her legs gave out. She stopped in front of a jewelry store, the windows dark except for a few security lights glowing faintly behind the glass. Her reflection stared back at her. Soaked hair, ruined makeup, a dress that clung to her like a second skin. She looked like a ghost, like something that used to be alive. And that was when she started crying. Not the quiet, dignified kind of crying. The ugly kind. The kind that came from somewhere deep and primal and impossible to control. She pressed her palms against the cold glass and let herself break apart right there on the sidewalk because there was no one left to see her, no one left to judge her, no one left who gave a damn whether she lived or died. That was when the car pulled up, a black Phantom, sleek and silent and expensive in a way that didn't belong on this empty street at this hour. It stopped at the curb 6 feet away from her, the engine idling low, the tinted windows impossible to see through. Serafina didn't move. She just stood there with her hands against the glass, rain pouring down her face, too exhausted to even be afraid. The back door opened. A man stepped out, tall, dark coat, gray eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and stopped caring a long time ago. He didn't carry an umbrella, didn't seem bothered by the rain. He just stood there for a moment, studying her the way someone might study a painting in a museum, not with pity, not with judgment, just with a kind of cold, clinical interest. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a handkerchief. He walked toward her slowly, his shoes barely making a sound on the wet pavement. When he stopped in front of her, he held out the handkerchief without saying a word. Serafina stared at it, then at him. "I don't need your help," she said, her voice raw and broken. "I know," he said quietly, "but you're going to take it anyway." She wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to shove the handkerchief back in his face and walk away. But her hands were shaking too hard, and her chest was too tight, and she was so goddamn tired of pretending she was fine when she wasn't. So she took it. She wiped her face, smearing mascara and rain and tears across the white fabric until it was ruined. When she tried to hand it back, he shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "You'll need it more than I will." "Who are you?" she asked. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Andrian Moretti. The name hit her like a fist. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. Not because he was famous, because he was feared. Andrian Moretti ran half the city from the shadows, controlled industries and politicians and money in ways most people didn't even realize existed. He was the kind of man who didn't make the news because he owned the people who wrote it. The kind of man who could ruin your life with a phone call and never lose a minute of sleep over it. And he was standing in front of her on a deserted sidewalk in the rain, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I was driving past," he said, "and I saw a woman standing in the rain looking like she was about to do something irreversible. I'm not going to kill myself. I didn't think you were." He tilted his head slightly, his gray eyes never leaving hers. "But I think you're about to disappear, and that would be a waste." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you just walked out of the Blackstone ballroom wearing a dress you bought for your own engagement party. I know your ex-fiancé just married your best friend in front of half of Chicago's elite. I know every person in that room has already written you off as the woman who wasn't good enough to keep him." Her stomach turned. "How do you—" "I make it my business to know things," he said simply, "and right now I'm offering you a choice. I don't need your pity." "Good, because I'm not offering pity." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he spoke. "I'm offering you a weapon." She blinked. "What?" "Walk away right now," he said, his voice low and steady. "Go home. Disappear. Let them forget you ever existed. Or—" He paused, his eyes locked on hers. "Walk back into that world beside me and make every single person who hurt you regret they ever underestimated your name." Her breath caught. "You're insane." "Probably," he said, "but I'm also the only person in this city who's offering you a way to fight back." She shook her head, trying to process what he was saying. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." "No," he agreed. "But I recognize something in you. Something most people don't see because they're too busy feeling sorry for you." He leaned in, just slightly, his voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. "You're not broken, Serafina. You're angry. And anger, when it's aimed correctly, is the most dangerous thing in the world." She stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was insane. He was insane. She should walk away right now, go home, lock her door, and never think about this moment again. But something in his eyes stopped her. Not warmth, not kindness, just a cold, unwavering certainty that made her believe, for the first time in 14 months, that maybe she didn't have to keep drowning. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing you're not willing to give," he said. "I want you to stand beside me. Let them see you with me. Let them wonder. Let them panic. And then what? Then we make them pay." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and final. Serafina looked down at the ruined handkerchief in her hands, then back at the ballroom 3 blocks away, where Roman and Celeste were probably cutting their cake right now, laughing and smiling and pretending they hadn't destroyed someone to get there. She thought about her empty apartment, her silent phone, the way her own mother had suggested she leave town like a criminal fleeing the scene. She thought about the last 14 months of her life, the humiliation, the whispers, the slow, suffocating erasure of everything she used to be. And then she looked back at Andrian Moretti. "If I do this," she said slowly, "I'm not your victim. I'm not some broken thing you get to fix." "Good," he said. "I don't need another victim. I need a partner." "I don't even know what that means." "You will." She took a breath, let it out, felt the rain soaking through her dress, felt the cold biting into her skin, felt the weight of a decision she knew she couldn't take back. And then she nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's burn it all down." Andrian's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. He turned and walked back toward the Phantom, opening the door and waiting. Serafina followed. She didn't look back at the ballroom, didn't think about Roman or Celeste or the life she was leaving behind. She just got into the car. The door closed behind her with a quiet, final click, and the Phantom pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the rain-soaked streets like a shadow swallowing itself whole. Inside the car, the silence was heavier than the rain outside. Serafina sat on the leather seat, her dress leaving a wet stain beneath her. Her hands folded in her lap like she was trying to keep them from shaking. Andrian sat across from her, his coat perfectly dry despite the rain, his expression unreadable. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My estate," he said. "Lake Forest." "That's an hour away." "Closer to 45 minutes at this time of night." She swallowed. What happens when we get there? You sleep, he said. You eat, you breathe. And tomorrow, we start planning. Planning what? Your return. The word hung in the air like a threat. Serafina leaned back against the seat, exhaustion crashing over her in waves. She didn't know what she'd just agreed to, didn't know what Andrian Moretti wanted from her or what this partnership was supposed to look like. All she knew was that for the first time in over a year, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like she was about to drag someone else under. The Phantom cut through the city, leaving the lights of downtown behind as they headed north toward the suburbs. Serafina watched the rain streak across the window, her reflection ghostly and distorted in the glass. "Why me?" she asked after a long silence. Andrian didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "Because you remind me of someone," he said, "someone who knew what it felt like to be erased. And I'm tired of watching people like Roman DeLuca win just because they were born into the right family. Who did I remind you of?" His jaw tightened. "My wife." Serafina's breath caught. She'd heard rumors about Andrian Moretti's wife, that she'd died young, that the grief had turned him into something colder, more dangerous. But no one talked about it openly. It was the kind of story people whispered about in corners, the kind of tragedy that made a man untouchable. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't be," he said. "She wouldn't have wanted your pity either." They didn't speak again for the rest of the drive. The estate appeared out of the darkness like something from another century. Stone walls, iron gates, a long driveway lined with trees that looked older than the city itself. The house was massive, sprawling, the kind of place that had been in a family for generations. Lights glowed in a few of the windows, but most of it was dark, silent, like a place holding its breath. The car stopped at the front entrance. Andrian stepped out first, then held the door open for her. Serafina hesitated for just a second before stepping out into the rain. A woman was waiting at the door. Older, her gray hair pulled back into a tight bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. She looked Serafina up and down, taking in the soaked dress, the ruined makeup, the exhaustion written across her face. "This is Elena," Andrian said. "She runs the house. Whatever you need, ask her." Elena nodded once, her expression neutral. "Follow me, Miss Vale." Serafina glanced at Andrian, but he was already walking away, disappearing into another part of the house without another word. Elena led her upstairs, through hallways lined with dark wood and old portraits, past rooms that looked like they hadn't been opened in years. Finally, they stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. "This will be your room," Elena said, pushing the door open. "There are clothes in the closet. Bathroom through that door. If you need anything else, use the phone on the nightstand." Serafina stepped inside. The room was large, furnished in dark wood and deep blues, with a bed that looked like it could sleep 4 people. A fire was already burning in the fireplace, casting shadows across the walls. "Thank you," she said quietly. Elena lingered in the doorway for a moment, her expression softening just slightly. "He's not a bad man," she said, "but he's a dangerous one. Be careful." Then she left, closing the door behind her. Serafina stood in the middle of the room, dripping water onto the hardwood floor, and realized she had no idea what she'd just walked into. She peeled off the wet dress, letting it fall to the floor in a heap, and walked into the bathroom. The shower was hot enough to burn, and she stood under the water until her skin turned red, until the cold finally left her bones. When she climbed into bed an hour later, clean and dry and more exhausted than she'd ever been in her life, she stared up at the ceiling and thought about Roman and Celeste dancing at their reception. She thought about the way Andrian Moretti had looked at her on that sidewalk. And she thought about the choice she'd just made. Sleep didn't come easy. But when it finally did, she dreamed of fire. Dumped. Morning came too soon. Serafina woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, her body stiff and sore, her mind still heavy with the weight of the night before. For a few seconds, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The wedding. The rain. Andrian Moretti. She sat up slowly, running a hand through her hair. The room looked different in the daylight. Less ominous, more like a museum. Everything in it felt old, expensive, untouched. She found clothes in the closet like Elena had promised. Simple things. Jeans, sweaters, a few dresses that looked like they'd been bought recently and never worn. She pulled on a pair of black jeans and a gray sweater, then made her way downstairs. The house was quiet. Too quiet. She followed the sound of voices until she found the kitchen. A massive space with marble counters and windows overlooking the back lawn. Elena was there, along with two other staff members Serafina didn't recognize. "Good morning," Elena said, her tone polite but distant. "There's coffee. Breakfast will be ready in 10 minutes. "Thank you," Serafina said, pouring herself a cup. "Where's Andrian?" "In his office. He'll join you shortly." Serafina sat at the long wooden table and waited. The coffee was strong, bitter, exactly what she needed. She sipped it slowly, trying to piece together what the hell she was supposed to do now. Andrian appeared 15 minutes later, dressed in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt, his hair still damp from a shower. He looked like someone who'd never lost a night of sleep in his life. "Sleep well?" he asked, sitting down across from her. "Not really," she admitted. He nodded, as if he'd expected that. "We have a lot to discuss." "I figured." Elena brought plates of food, eggs, toast, fruit, and then disappeared again, leaving them alone. Serafina picked at her food, her appetite non-existent. "What do you know about Roman's family?" Andrian asked, cutting straight to the point. "Not much," she said. "Old money, real estate. Roman always said they were legitimate, but I don't know if that was true." "It's not," Andrian said. "The DeLuca family has been laundering money through their properties for decades. Roman's father runs the operation. Roman himself is just a figurehead." Serafina frowned. "How do you know that?" "Because I've been watching them for years," he said simply. "They've been trying to expand into territory I control. This marriage to Celeste Arden, it's not about love. It's about securing an alliance with her father's financial empire. So what does that have to do with me?" Andrian leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes locked on hers. "You're going to help me destroy that alliance." Her stomach twisted. "How?" "By making them think you're a threat they didn't see coming," he said. "By standing beside me in public. By showing them that you're not the broken woman they wrote off. By making Roman DeLuca realize he made the biggest mistake of his life when he let you go." "And then what?" "Then we take everything from him." The words were calm, matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. Serafina set down her fork, her hands trembling slightly. "You want me to be part of some revenge plot?" "I want you to take back your power," Andrian said. "Everything else is just strategy." She stared at him, trying to read his expression. "What do you get out of this?" "I get to watch the DeLuca empire crumble," he said, "and I get a partner who understands what it's like to be underestimated." "That's it? That's enough." Serafina didn't know whether to believe him, but she also didn't have anywhere else to go. No other options, no other lifeline. "When do we start?" she asked quietly. Andrian's mouth curved into a faint smile. "Tonight." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Andrian brought in a stylist, a tailor, a woman who did Serafina's hair and makeup with the precision of a surgeon. They transformed her into something unrecognizable, not softer, not prettier, but sharper, dangerous. A woman who looked like she could walk into a room and own it without saying a word. The dress they brought her was silver, cut low in the back, fitted in all the right places. The necklace was an heirloom from the Moretti family vault, emeralds and diamonds that caught the light like broken glass. When Serafina looked at herself in the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. "Good," Andrian said from the doorway. He'd changed into a black suit, perfectly tailored, his hair slicked back. He looked like a man who could buy or ruin anyone in the room without breaking a sweat. "Where are we going?" she asked. "The DeLuca wedding reception," he said. "It's tonight, and we're going to make an entrance they'll never forget." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "You're serious?" "I don't joke about these things." She turned to face him, her pulse racing. "They're going to destroy me. Roman, Celeste, everyone in that room." "Let them try," Andrian said, his voice cold and steady. "You're not walking in there alone anymore." He held out his hand. Serafina stared at it for a long moment. Then she took it. They arrived at the black stone ballroom an hour later, the same place where she'd stood crying in the rain less than 24 hours ago. But tonight was different. Tonight she walked through the front doors with Andrian Moretti at her side, her head high, the emerald necklace glittering at her throat. The ballroom fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The music didn't stop, but it might as well have. Serafina felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, felt the weight of their shock, their confusion, their sudden, vicious panic. She saw Roman across the room, his face going pale. Saw Celeste freeze mid-laugh, her hand clutching Roman's arm like she was about to collapse. And then Andrian spoke. His voice carried across the room, calm and clear and absolutely devastating. "Good evening," he said. "I'd like to introduce you to my wife." The room exploded into chaos. The word wife detonated in the center of the ballroom like a grenade someone had rolled across the marble floor and left ticking. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The string quartet kept playing because the musicians hadn't gotten the memo that the world had just tilted off its axis, and the violin sounded obscene against the silence that had swallowed every other sound in the room. Serafina felt Andrian's hand tighten around hers, not hard enough to hurt, just enough to anchor her. She forced herself to keep her chin up, her expression calm, even though her heart was slamming against her ribs so hard she thought everyone could see it through the silver dress. Roman DeLuca stood frozen near the dessert table, a champagne flute halfway to his mouth. His face had gone the color of old newspaper. Beside him, Celeste looked like someone had just told her the floor was about to open up and swallow her whole. Her perfectly painted mouth hung open, her eyes darting between Serafina and Andrian like she was trying to solve a math problem that didn't make sense. Then the whispers started. "Did he just say wife? That's Andrian Moretti, Is that the same girl from... Oh my God, when did this happen?" The sound grew louder, spreading through the room like wildfire, voices overlapping until it became a wall of noise that pressed against Serafina's skull. She wanted to run. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to turn around and get the hell out of there before this whole thing collapsed on top of her. But Andrian didn't move, so neither did she. A man pushed through the crowd, older, silver-haired, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's cars. His face was hard, his jaw set like he was about to start a fight. Serafina recognized him from photos she'd seen in the society pages. Vincent DeLuca, Roman's father. "Moretti," Vincent said, his voice low and dangerous. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Andrian smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm attending a wedding reception, Vincent, same as everyone else. You're not welcome here." "That's strange," Andrian said mildly. "I don't recall needing your permission to enter a public venue." Vincent's face darkened. "You bring her into my son's wedding. I brought my wife," Andrian corrected, his tone sharpening just enough to draw blood. "And unless you'd like to explain to everyone in this room why you have a problem with that, I suggest you step aside." The two men stared at each other, the air between them crackling with something violent and barely contained. Serafina could feel the tension radiating off both of them, could see the way Vincent's hands had curled into fists at his sides. Then Roman appeared at his father's shoulder, his face pale but his eyes hard. "This is bullshit," he said, his voice shaking. "Sarah, what the hell are you doing?" It was the first time he'd spoken to her in over a year. Hearing her name in his mouth made her stomach twist. "I'm attending your wedding," she said calmly. "Congratulations, by the way. A beautiful ceremony." Roman flinched like she'd slapped him. "You can't just..." "Can't what?" she asked, her voice colder now. "Can't move on? Can't show up to a public event? Can't get married?" She paused, letting the words sink in. "Because I'm pretty sure you didn't have a problem doing all of those things." "That's not fair." "Fair?" The word came out sharp enough to cut. "You want to talk to me about fair?" Andrian's hand shifted to the small of her back, a subtle reminder that she wasn't alone. She took a breath, forced herself to dial it back. This wasn't the time to fall apart. This was the time to twist the knife. "Enjoy your reception," she said, her tone returning to something polite and venomous. "We won't stay long." She turned, letting Andrian guide her deeper into the ballroom. The crowd parted in front of them like water, people stepping back instinctively, their eyes wide and hungry. Serafina could hear the whispers following her, could feel the weight of 100 conversations she'd never be part of but would definitely be the subject of. They stopped near one of the tables, and a waiter appeared immediately with champagne. Andrian took 2 glasses, handing one to her. His expression hadn't changed, still calm, still unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost like approval. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "I feel like I'm going to throw up," she admitted. "Don't, not yet. We're not finished." Across the room she could see Roman and Vincent having a heated conversation, their heads bent close together. Celeste stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself, looking lost. A photographer hovered nearby, clearly trying to decide if this was a moment worth capturing. "They're panicking," Andrian observed. "Good," Serafina said, then quieter. "Is it true?" "Is what true?" "Are we actually married?" He took a sip of champagne, his eyes never leaving the crowd. "Not yet." Her stomach dropped. "What?" "We will be," he said. "In 9 days. I've already filed the paperwork. The ceremony is scheduled for next Wednesday at a courthouse downtown. Small, private. Just the 2 of us and the witnesses required by law." She stared at him, her mind racing. You can't decide that without asking me." "I'm not deciding anything," he said, finally looking at her. "I'm offering you a choice. You can walk away right now. Go home. Pretend tonight never happened. Or you can commit to this fully, make it real, make it legal, make it impossible for them to dismiss you as some passing distraction." "And if I say no?" "Then I'll handle the fallout," he said. "But you'll have lost your only shot at taking back your life." She wanted to argue with him, wanted to tell him he was insane, that this whole plan was reckless and dangerous and probably illegal in at least 3 different ways. But the truth was, standing here in this ballroom with Roman's eyes boring into her back and Celeste's perfect life cracking at the seams, she felt more alive than she had in over a year. "I need to think about it," she said. "Take your time," Andrian said. "You have 9 days." Before she could respond, a man in a dark suit approached them. He was younger than Andrian, maybe early 30s, with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at Serafina the way someone might look at a stray dog they were trying to decide whether to kick. "Andrian Tashi," the man said. "Interesting choice of venue for your reappearance." "Matteo," Andrian said, his tone flat. "I wasn't aware you'd been invited." "I wasn't," Matteo said, his smile widening. "But when I heard my dear brother was making a scene at the De Luca wedding, I had to see it for myself." His eyes slid to Serafina. "And this must be the mysterious wife everyone's talking about." Serafina felt Andrian's posture shift beside her. Subtle, but unmistakable. The air between the 2 men turned cold enough to frost. "Serafina," Andrian said quietly, "this is my brother, Matteo Moretti." "Half-brother," Matteo corrected, still smiling. "Different mothers, same unfortunate father." He extended a hand toward Serafina. "A pleasure." She shook his hand because refusing would have caused a scene, but his grip was too tight, too long, like he was trying to prove something. When he finally let go, she resisted the urge to wipe her palm on her dress. "I didn't know Andrian had a brother," she said carefully. "Most people don't," Matteo said. "Andrian prefers to keep certain things private. Isn't that right, brother?" "What do you want, Matteo?" Andrian asked. "Just to offer my congratulations," Matteo said. "Marriage is such a big step, especially for someone who swore he'd never remarry after—" He trailed off, his eyes glinting with something cruel. "Well, after." Andrian's jaw tightened. For the first time since Serafina had met him, she saw a crack in his control. Just a flicker, but it was there. "Careful," Andrian said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Matteo raised his hands in mock surrender. "I meant no offense. I'm sure this one will last much longer than the first." He turned back to Serafina. "Has he told you about Isabella, his late wife? Beautiful woman, tragic ending, but I'm sure you know all about that." Serafina didn't know what to say. She could feel the tension radiating off Andrian like heat from a furnace, could see the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "It was nice meeting you, Matteo," she said, her voice cold. "But we have somewhere to be." "Of course," Matteo said, stepping back. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, both of you." He disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than it should have. Andrian didn't move. didn't speak, just stood there staring at the spot where his brother had been, his expression carved from stone. "Andrian," Serafina said quietly. "We're leaving," he said. "What?" "But we just... now." He turned and started walking toward the exit, not waiting to see if she followed. Serafina hesitated for just a second, glancing back at the ballroom, at Roman and Celeste and Vincent and all the people who had spent the last year erasing her from their lives. Then she turned and followed Andrian out into the night. The Phantom was waiting at the curb, the engine already running. Andrian climbed in without a word, his face hard, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Serafina slid in beside him, and the door closed with a heavy thunk that felt too final. They drove in silence for 10 minutes before Serafina finally spoke. "Who's Isabella?" Andrian didn't answer. He just stared out the window at the city passing by, his hands folded in his lap, his breathing slow and controlled in a way that seemed forced. "Andrian." "My wife," he said finally, his voice flat. "My first wife. She died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." "Your brother seems..." "My brother is a parasite," Andrian said, his tone sharp enough to cut. "He's been trying to take control of the family business since the day Isabella died. He sees you as another weakness he can exploit." "Is that what I am?" she asked. "A weakness." He turned to look at her then, his gray eyes hard. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're strong enough to survive what comes next." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. "What comes next?" she asked. "War," he said simply. "Vincent DeLuca won't let tonight slide. Matteo will use it as ammunition to turn the organization against me. And Roman..." He paused, his mouth curving into something bitter. "Roman will do whatever his father tells him to do. Which means things are about to get very dangerous very fast." "Maybe we should stop," Serafina said. "Call this whole thing off before someone gets hurt." "It's too late for that," Andrian said. "The second I called you my wife in front of 200 people, I painted a target on both our backs. The only way forward now is to make it real." "So what, I just marry you? A man I barely know? A man whose brother just threatened me in the middle of a wedding reception?" "Yes," Andrian said, "unless you have a better idea." She didn't. They arrived back at the estate an hour later. The house was dark, except for a few lights burning in the downstairs windows. Andrian got out first, then held the door open for her. She climbed out slowly, her legs unsteady in the heels she'd been wearing for too many hours. Inside, Elena was waiting in the foyer, her expression neutral. "There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry," she said. "And I've drawn a bath upstairs if you'd like to." "I'm fine," Serafina said quickly. "Thank you." Elena nodded once, then disappeared down the hallway. Andrian shrugged off his jacket, draping it over the back of a chair. He looked exhausted suddenly. Not physically, but in some deeper way, like the weight he'd been carrying all night had finally caught up with him. "You should get some sleep," he said. "So should you." "I have work to do." "At midnight? I always have work to do." He paused, then added, "There's something you should know. Tomorrow morning, your face is going to be on the front page of every gossip site and newspaper in the city. The DeLuca wedding was high profile enough already, but after tonight..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "It's going to be a circus." "Great," she muttered. "If you change your mind about the wedding..." "I won't," she said, surprising herself. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. "You should be more careful about the promises you make." "So should you." His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Get some sleep, Serafina." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows at the back of the house. Serafina stood alone in the foyer for a long moment, staring at the staircase leading up to her room. Then she pulled out her phone, something she'd been avoiding all night, and opened the Messages app. 43 unread texts, most of them from numbers she didn't recognize, a few from old friends she hadn't spoken to in months, one from her mother. She opened that one first. "Serafina, what have you done? Call me immediately." She closed the app without responding. Upstairs, she peeled off the silver dress and let it fall to the floor in a heap. The emerald necklace went back into its velvet box, the clasp cold against her fingers. She stood in front of the mirror in her underwear, staring at the woman looking back at her. Pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, a bruise forming on her hip where she'd bumped into a table at the reception. She looked like someone who'd just survived a car crash. Maybe that's exactly what tonight had been. She climbed into bed without bothering to shower, too exhausted to do anything but close her eyes and hope sleep would come. But her mind wouldn't shut off. It kept replaying the night in fragments. Roman's pale face, Celeste's shock, Mateo's cruel smile, Andrian's cold fury when his brother brought up Isabella. She thought about the wedding 9 days from now, thought about standing in a courthouse beside a man she barely knew, signing papers that would tie their lives together legally, publicly, irrevocably. And she thought about the fact that she'd already made up her mind. She was going to do it, not because she loved Andrian Moretti, not because she thought this was going to end well, but because for the first time in over a year, she felt like she had a choice, like she had power, like she could look Roman DeLuca in the eye and make him understand that she wasn't the broken thing he'd left behind. She was something else now, something sharp. Sleep finally came sometime after 3 in the morning, and when it did, she dreamed of fire again. Only this time, she wasn't running from it. She was standing in the middle of the flames, watching everything burn. Morning came with a phone call. Serafina woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a number she didn't recognize. She ignored it. It buzzed again 30 seconds later. Then again. Then again. She finally picked it up on the 5th call, her voice rough with sleep. "What?" "Miss Vale," a woman's voice, professional and clipped. "This is Andrea Tillman from the Chicago Tribune. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about your relationship with Andrian Moretti." Serafina hung up without responding. The phone started buzzing again immediately. Different number this time. She turned it off and threw it across the room. Downstairs, she found Elena in the kitchen, already preparing breakfast. The older woman glanced up when Serafina entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Coffee?" Elena asked. "Please," Serafina said, collapsing into one of the chairs at the table. Elena poured her a cup without comment, then set a plate of food in front of her. Eggs, toast, fruit. Serafina picked at it without much appetite. "Where's Andrian?" she asked. "In his office," Elena said. "He's been on the phone since 5 this morning." "Dealing with last night?" "Among other things." Serafina took a sip of coffee, letting the heat burn down her throat. "Elena, can I ask you something?" The older woman paused, her hand still on the counter. "Of course." "Why do you stay here?" Elena frowned. "I don't understand." "With Andrian," Serafina clarified. "Why do you stay? Why do any of you stay? This house, this life. It can't be easy." Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Serafina had heard it before. "I was Isabella's nurse," she said, "in the final months. Andrian asked me to stay after she died. He said he didn't want the house to feel empty." She paused, her eyes distant. "I think he was afraid if he let everyone go, he'd forget she was ever here." Serafina's chest tightened. "What happened to her?" "Cancer," Elena said quietly. "She fought it for 2 years. By the end," she trailed off, shaking her head. "By the end, she was ready to go. Andrian wasn't. I don't think he ever will be. He doesn't talk about her." "No," Elena agreed. "He doesn't talk about much of anything, but that doesn't mean he's not feeling it." Before Serafina could respond, Andrian appeared in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. His shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled, shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there the night before. "We have a problem," he said. Elena excused herself immediately, disappearing into another part of the house. Serafina set down her coffee, her stomach sinking. "What kind of problem?" she asked. Andrian crossed to the table, pulling out his phone and setting it in front of her. The screen showed a news article from one of the city's major papers. The headline read, "Moretti crashes DeLuca wedding with mystery bride. Chicago's elite in chaos." Below it was a photo of the two of them from last night. Serafina in the silver dress, Andrian's hand on her back, both of them looking like they belonged in a magazine spread instead of a crime drama. "It's everywhere," Andrian said. "Every paper, every website, every gossip blog. Vincent DeLuca is furious. He's been calling my lawyers all morning threatening lawsuits. Can he do that? No, but he can make things difficult. Andrian ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. There's more. Matteo showed up at the house this morning. Serafina's head snapped up. Here? I had security turn him away, Andrian said. But he made it clear he's not going to let this go. He's already started making calls to members of the organization, spreading rumors that I'm losing control. Because of me. Because of both of us. He paused, his jaw tightening. He's going to push for a vote. A vote on what? On whether I'm still fit to lead the family business. Serafina felt like the floor had just dropped out from under her. Can he do that? Technically, yes. If enough of the captains agree, they can call for a vote of no confidence. If I lose, Matteo takes over. And if you lose because of me, then we both lose, Andrian said flatly, which is why we need to accelerate the timeline. What do you mean? I mean we're getting married tomorrow. She stared at him. What? I've already called the courthouse, he said. They're expediting the paperwork. The ceremony is scheduled for 10 a.m. Andrian, that's insane. It's necessary, he interrupted. The longer we wait, the more time Matteo has to undermine us. If we're legally married, it makes you untouchable. It makes it clear that this isn't some game or publicity stunt. It shows the organization that I'm committed. To what? To me, we barely know each other. That doesn't matter, he said, his voice cold. What matters is perception. And right now, we need to control the narrative before someone else does it for us. Serafina stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. You can't make these decisions without asking me. I'm not making decisions, Andrian said, his tone hard. I'm presenting you with the reality of the situation. You agreed to this. You said you wanted to fight back. Well, this is what fighting back looks like. This is what drowning looks like, she shot back. Then drown with me, he said quietly, or walk away. But make the choice now, Serafina, because tomorrow morning, one way or another, everything changes. They stared at each other across the kitchen, the silence heavy and suffocating. Serafina's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, could taste something metallic and wrong on her tongue. She thought about Roman and Celeste, thought about her empty apartment and her silent phone, and the way everyone in her life had decided she wasn't worth keeping. Thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, small and scared and so desperate to be loved that she'd let herself become invisible. And then she thought about the woman she'd seen in the mirror last night, the one in the silver dress with the emerald necklace and the cold eyes, the one who'd walked into that ballroom and watched Roman DeLuca's world crack open at the seams. Fine, she said. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. But after this, we're doing things my way. Andrian's mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had any warmth behind it. Deal. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Serafina standing alone in the middle of the room, her hands shaking, her breath coming too fast. She'd just agreed to marry a man she didn't love, a man she barely knew, a man whose brother wanted him dead. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. But it was too late to take it back now. The rest of the day passed in a haze of phone calls and paperwork and meetings with people whose names Serafina didn't bother learning. Andrian's lawyers showed up mid-afternoon with thick stacks of documents that needed signatures, explanations about prenuptial agreements and asset protection, and a dozen other legal concepts that made her head spin. You don't have to sign any of this, one of the lawyers told her. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with graying hair and a suit that probably cost more than Serafina's car. The marriage can proceed without a prenup if you prefer. What's the catch? Serafina asked. No catch, the woman said. Mr. Moretti has instructed us to make this as straightforward as possible. If you sign, you're entitled to nothing in the event of a divorce. If you don't sign, you're entitled to half. Serafina looked at Andrian, who was standing near the window with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. What do you want me to do? She asked. I want you to make whatever choice lets you sleep at night, he said. She turned back to the lawyer. Give me a pen. She signed every document without reading them, her hand steady even though her mind was screaming at her to stop. When it was done, the lawyers packed up their briefcases and left, and Serafina was alone with Andrian again. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I did, she said. Because if I didn't, you'd spend the rest of your life wondering if I was only in this for the money. I wouldn't have. Yes, you would have. She turned to face him. And you would have been right to wonder. But I'm not here for your money, Andrian. I'm here because I'm tired of being the woman everyone feels sorry for. And if marrying you is what it takes to change that, then fine. I'll marry you. But don't ever ask me to pretend this is something it's not. He stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his eyes. What is it then? A transaction, she said. You get someone to stand beside you when your brother tries to take your empire. I get revenge on the people who destroyed me. We both win. And after? After what? After the revenge is finished, he said. After Roman and Celeste and everyone else who hurt you has paid. What happens then? She didn't have an answer for that. Andrian nodded, as if he'd expected as much. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left without another word, and Serafina stood alone in the study, staring at the pile of signed documents on the desk. Tomorrow she was getting married. Tomorrow she was becoming someone's wife. Tomorrow she was stepping across a line she could never uncross, and she had absolutely no idea if she was making the right choice. But it was too late to turn back now. The thing about choices, she was learning, was that they stopped being choices the second you made them. After that, they were just consequences waiting to happen. She climbed the stairs to her room and lay down on the bed fully clothed, staring up at the ceiling until the light outside the window faded to black. Sleep didn't come. Instead, she lay there in the dark, listening to the sound of her own breathing, and wondered what version of herself she'd be when she woke up tomorrow. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed, and Serafina closed her eyes and waited for morning. Morning arrived with the kind of gray light that made everything look washed out and wrong. Serafina hadn't slept. She'd spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift across the plaster as her mind cycled through every possible way this could go catastrophically wrong. By the time dawn broke through the windows, she felt hollowed out, like someone had taken a spoon and scraped everything useful out of her skull. She showered in water hot enough to scald, then stood in front of the closet trying to figure out what the hell you were supposed to wear to marry a man you didn't love in a courthouse ceremony that felt more like signing a business contract than starting a life together. Elena had left a dress hanging on the door, cream-colored, simple, elegant in a way that made Serafina's throat tighten. It looked like something a real bride would wear, someone who actually wanted this. She put it on anyway. Downstairs, Andrian was already waiting in the foyer, dressed in a dark suit that made him look like he was attending a funeral instead of a wedding. His face was drawn, the shadows under his eyes deeper than they'd been yesterday. He looked up when she appeared at the top of the stairs, and something flickered across his expression, too fast for her to read, gone before she could name it. You ready? He asked. No, she said honestly. Good. Neither am I. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes. They didn't speak. Andrian stared out the window, his jaw tight, his hands folded in his lap in a way that looked almost like prayer. Serafina kept her eyes on the passing city, watching Chicago blur past in shades of gray and brown and steel. Somewhere out there, Roman and Celeste were probably still asleep in whatever expensive hotel suite they'd spent their wedding night in. Somewhere out there, Matteo Moretti was already plotting his next move. And somewhere inside Serafina's chest, a voice kept whispering that she was about to make a mistake she'd never be able to undo. The courthouse was ugly in the way all government buildings are ugly, concrete and glass and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly. They walked through security, past metal detectors and bored guards who barely glanced at them. A clerk led them down a hallway to a small room with wood-paneled walls and a desk that had probably been there since the 70s. Two witnesses were already waiting, a man and a woman Serafina didn't recognize. They nodded politely when Andrian introduced them, but their eyes were cold, assessing. She wondered if they were part of his organization, wondered what they thought about their boss marrying some random woman he'd picked up off a sidewalk 2 nights ago. The officiant arrived 5 minutes later, an older woman with reading glasses and a tired smile. She went through the paperwork with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, checking IDs, verifying signatures, making sure everything was in order. All right, she said finally, looking up at them over the top of her glasses. Are we ready to begin? Serafina's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She glanced at Andrian. He was staring straight ahead, his expression carved from stone. but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "Yes," he said. The officiant began reading from a script, her voice flat and bureaucratic. Serafina barely heard the words. Something about love and commitment in the state of Illinois. Something about honoring and cherishing. Something about till death. The phrases washed over her like white noise, meaningless syllables that had nothing to do with what was actually happening in this room. "Do you, Andrian Moretti, take Serafina Vale to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice didn't waver, didn't hesitate. He said it like he was signing a contract, which Serafina supposed was exactly what this was. "And do you, Serafina Vale, take Andrian Moretti to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The words stuck in her throat. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there frozen, while everyone in the room stared at her, waiting for an answer she wasn't sure she could give. Then she thought about Roman's face last night, thought about Celeste's shock, thought about the way Vincent DeLuca had looked at her like she was something he wanted to scrape off his shoe. "I do," she said. The officiant smiled, like this was a happy moment instead of whatever the hell it actually was. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife." She didn't say anything about kissing. Andrian signed the marriage certificate first, his signature quick and precise. Then he handed the pen to Serafina. Her hand shook as she wrote her name, the letters coming out uneven, childish. When she finished, the witnesses signed beneath them, and just like that it was done. She was married. She was Serafina Moretti now. The thought made her want to vomit. Outside, the sky had started drizzling, a thin, cold rain that felt appropriate for the occasion. Andrian held the car door open for her, and she climbed in without meeting his eyes. The witnesses got into a different car parked behind them. The Phantom pulled away from the curb, and Serafina watched the courthouse disappear in the side mirror. "Well," she said finally, her voice hollow. "That was romantic." Andrian didn't respond. He just stared out the window, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't figure out how to say. "Are we going back to the estate?" she asked. "No," he said. "We're going to my office downtown. There's a meeting in an hour." "What kind of meeting?" "The kind where I prove to a room full of dangerous men that marrying you wasn't a mistake." Her stomach twisted. "Great, no pressure. Serafina." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were harder than she'd ever seen them. "When we walk into that room, you need to be someone they can't dismiss. Not the woman who got left at the altar, not some broken thing I'm trying to fix. You need to be cold, ruthless, untouchable." "I don't know how to be that." "Yes, you do," he said. "I saw it in you the night we met. I saw it last night at the reception. You just need to stop apologizing for it." She wanted to argue with him, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't ruthless, that she'd never been ruthless, that she was just someone who'd been hurt too many times and was finally starting to hit back. But the look in his eyes stopped her. He believed what he was saying. He actually believed she could be the kind of person who walked into a room full of criminals and made them afraid. God help her, she wanted to believe it too. The office was in one of the newer glass towers downtown, all sleek lines and expensive views. Andrian's floor took up the entire top level, conference rooms and private offices, and a reception area that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The woman at the desk stood when they entered, her eyes widening slightly when she saw Serafina. "Mr. Moretti," she said quickly, "they're already waiting in the boardroom." "Thank you, Claire." Andrian kept walking, his hand resting lightly on Serafina's lower back. "Remember what I said. Be cold. Be untouchable." The boardroom was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a table long enough to seat 20 people. 15 men were already there, sitting in expensive chairs, drinking coffee from china cups. They all looked up when the door opened. All of them stopped talking at the exact same time. Matteo Moretti was sitting at the far end of the table, a smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Andrian," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "And the blushing bride. How wonderful. Congratulations on your marriage." "Cut the shit, Matteo," Andrian said flatly. He pulled out a chair for Serafina, then sat down beside her at the head of the table. "You called this meeting. Let's hear what you have to say." Matteo's smile widened. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket like he was about to give a presentation. "Gentlemen," he said, addressing the room, "I think we all know why we're here. My brother has made a series of questionable decisions recently, decisions that put our entire organization at risk." "Get to the point," Andrian said. "The point," Matteo said, his voice hardening, "is that you married a woman you met 2 days ago. A woman with no connection to our world, no understanding of how we operate, no loyalty to this family. You paraded her in front of the DeLucas like she was some kind of trophy, and now Vincent DeLuca is threatening war." "Vincent DeLuca was always going to threaten war," Andrian said calmly. "That's what he does. And we don't negotiate with threats." "We also don't pick fights we can't win," one of the other men said. He was older, gray-haired, with a face like weathered leather. "The DeLuca family has been a thorn in our side for years, but they've never been stupid enough to come after us directly. You changed that. You made this personal." "It was always personal," Andrian said. "Vincent's been trying to muscle in on our territory for a decade. This marriage just gave him an excuse to make his move." "Or you gave him an excuse by acting like a lovesick fool," Matteo said, his tone sharpening. He turned to look at Serafina, his eyes cold. "Tell me, Mrs. Moretti, what exactly do you bring to this organization? What skills do you have that justify my brother risking everything we've built?" Serafina felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. Her mouth went dry. She could feel sweat starting to beat at the back of her neck, could hear her pulse pounding in her ears. Be cold. Be untouchable. She stood slowly, her hands flat on the table, and met Matteo's eyes without flinching. "I'm a lawyer," she said, her voice steady. "I specialized in corporate litigation before I left my firm last year. I know how to read contracts, find loopholes, and destroy people in court without them ever seeing it coming." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I also know that Vincent DeLuca has been laundering money through his real estate holdings for at least 15 years. I know he's been using shell companies registered in Delaware to hide assets from the IRS, and I know that if someone were to hand that information to the right federal prosecutor, his entire empire would collapse in about 6 weeks." The room went silent. Matteo's smile had frozen on his face. "That's a bold claim." "It's not a claim," Serafina said. "It's a fact. I spent the last 24 hours going through every piece of financial data I could find on the DeLuca family. I have copies of wire transfers, incorporation documents, tax filings. I have everything." She was lying. She didn't have anything. But she said it with enough confidence that no one in the room could tell. Andrian was staring at her, his expression unreadable. Matteo had gone very still, his eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing," Matteo said. "Try me," Serafina said coldly. "Make another move against Andrian, and I'll bury Vincent DeLuca so deep his grandchildren will still be paying his legal fees." One of the men at the table let out a low whistle. Another started laughing, a rough, surprised sound. The gray-haired man who'd spoken earlier leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well," he said, "that's certainly unexpected." Matteo's face had gone red. "This is insane. Andrian, you can't seriously expect us to—" "I expect you to remember who's in charge here," Andrian said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was something lethal underneath it. "I expect you to do your job instead of spending your time trying to undermine me, and I expect you to show my wife the respect she's earned." "She's earned nothing. She just threatened to destroy the DeLuca family in front of 15 witnesses," Andrian interrupted. "I'd say that's earned her a seat at this table." Matteo looked like he wanted to flip the table. Instead, he grabbed his coat off the back of his chair and headed for the door. "This isn't over," he said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. "Yes," Andrian said. "It is." The door slammed behind him. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. The men asked questions about the DeLucas, about strategy, about how Andrian planned to handle the fallout from the wedding. Serafina answered when she was spoken to, keeping her voice level, her expression neutral. She could feel their eyes on her, reassessing, recalculating. She'd surprised them. That was good. Surprise was a weapon. By the time they left, her hands were shaking so badly she had to shove them in her coat pockets to hide it. In the elevator, Andrian finally spoke. "That was impressive," he said quietly. That was a lie, she said. I don't have anything on Vincent DeLuca. I don't have documents. I don't have evidence. I just needed them to think I did. I know. She turned to stare at him. You knew? I knew, he said. But they didn't. And that's what mattered. What if they call my bluff? Then we'll figure it out. He glanced at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw something that looked almost like respect in his eyes. But I don't think they will. You scared them, Serafina. That's not easy to do. The elevator doors opened and they stepped out into the parking garage. The Phantom was waiting near the entrance, the engine already running. Serafina's phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. She finally pulled it out, glancing at the screen. 17 missed calls, all from the same number, Roman. Her stomach dropped. What is it? Andrian asked, noticing her expression. Nothing, she said quickly, shoving the phone back in her purse. Just spam. But it wasn't spam, and she knew it. Roman was calling her. After over a year of silence, he was finally calling her, and she had no idea what that meant. They were halfway back to the estate when Serafina's phone started buzzing again. This time, she answered it. What do you want, Roman? There was a pause on the other end, then his voice, tight and angry. We need to talk. No, we really don't. Sarah, please, don't call me that. Fine. Serafina. He said her full name like it tasted wrong in his mouth. What the hell are you doing? Marrying Andrian Moretti? Are you insane? That's really none of your business anymore. It is my business when you're marrying a criminal just to get back at me. This has nothing to do with you, she lied. Bullshit, Roman snapped. You showed up at my wedding wearing that goddamn dress. You walked in on the arm of the most dangerous man in Chicago, and now you're legally married to him. This is all about me. Admit it. Serafina felt something hot and vicious rise in her chest. You know what, Roman? You're right. This is about you. It's about the fact that you cheated on me with my best friend for 7 months. It's about the fact that you humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. It's about the fact that you looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't enough for you. I never said that. You didn't have to. Her voice cracked just slightly, and she hated herself for it. You made it very clear when you proposed to Celeste 6 weeks after we broke up. You made it very clear when you invited half of Chicago to watch you marry her. So yeah, Roman, this is about you. And you know what the best part is? You're terrified. I can hear it in your voice. You're terrified that I'm not going to stay quietly in whatever corner you shoved me into. You're terrified that I'm going to do something that affects your perfect new life. My father is going to destroy him, Roman said, his voice low and dangerous. He's going to destroy both of you, and when that happens, don't come crying to me. I wouldn't dream of it, Serafina said. She hung up. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to breathe, trying to calm the fury that was clawing its way up her throat. Andrian was watching her, his expression carefully neutral. That sounded productive. He's scared, she said. Good. Fear makes people sloppy. Or dangerous. Same thing. They drove the rest of the way in silence. When they arrived at the estate, Elena was waiting in the foyer, her face pale. Mr. Moretti, she said quickly, you have a visitor. Andrian frowned. Who? A federal agent. She says it's urgent. Serafina's stomach dropped. Andrian's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Where is she? The study. They found the agent standing near the window, her back to the door. She was younger than Serafina expected. Maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and a suit that screamed government employee. She turned when they entered, and her eyes went straight to Serafina. Mrs. Moretti, the woman said. Or should I say Mrs. Vale? I understand congratulations are in order. Who the hell are you? Andrian asked. The woman pulled out a badge. Special Agent Lisa Cordova, FBI. I'm leading an investigation into the Moretti organization. Get out of my house, Andrian said flatly. I will, Cordova said. But first, I think Mrs. Moretti should hear what I have to say. She turned back to Serafina. Did you know your husband killed his first wife? The words hit like a physical blow. Serafina felt the room tilt sideways, felt her breath catch in her chest. She turned to look at Andrian, waiting for him to deny it, to tell this woman she was insane. But Andrian didn't say anything. His face had gone completely blank. That's a lie, Serafina said, her voice shaking. Is it? Cordova pulled a file from her briefcase, setting it on the desk. Isabella Moretti died 3 years ago. Official cause of death, complications from cancer. But that's not the whole story, is it, Mr. Moretti? Get out. Andrian's voice was low, dangerous. Isabella was going to testify against you, Cordova continued, ignoring him. She'd been cooperating with our investigation for months. She was going to give us everything, financial records, names, locations, and then, very conveniently, she died. A massive overdose of morphine. The doctors said it was an accident, a mistake with her pain medication. It was an accident, Andrian said, his voice like gravel. Was it? Cordova looked at Serafina. Or did your husband decide his wife was a liability? Serafina couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She stared at Andrian, waiting for him to say something, to defend himself, to tell her this was all some sick game the FBI was playing. But he didn't. He just stood there, his hands clenched into fists, his face carved from stone. I think you should leave, Serafina heard herself say. Cordova smiled, a cold, thin smile. Think about what I said, Mrs. Moretti. Think about who you just married, and if you want to talk... She pulled out a card, setting it on top of the file. My number's on there. She walked out without another word. The silence she left behind was suffocating. Serafina turned to Andrian, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Tell me she's lying. Andrian didn't move, didn't speak. Andrian, tell me she's lying. I didn't kill Isabella, he said finally, his voice hollow. But she was cooperating with the FBI. He closed his eyes. Yes. And you knew. Yes. And she died. Yes. Serafina felt something inside her chest crack open. Oh my God. It wasn't... Andrian started, then stopped. He ran a hand over his face, and when he looked at her again, his eyes were raw. It wasn't what you think. Then what was it? She was dying anyway, he said quietly. The cancer had spread to her brain. She was in constant pain. The doctor said she had maybe 2 months left. His voice broke. She asked me to help her end it. She didn't want to suffer anymore. She didn't want to spend her last days in a hospital bed. So you gave her morphine. I gave her a choice, Andrian said, and she made it. But the FBI doesn't care about that. They see a dead witness and a husband with motive, and they've been trying to build a case against me ever since. Serafina's legs felt weak. She sat down hard in one of the leather chairs, her mind racing. Why didn't you tell me this? Would it have changed anything? I don't know. She looked up at him, and she couldn't keep the anger out of her voice. Maybe it would have changed everything. I just married you, Andrian. I just stood in a courthouse and signed legal documents tying my life to yours. And now I find out you helped your first wife die, and the FBI thinks you murdered her? I didn't murder her. But they think you did, which means I'm now married to a man who's under federal investigation for homicide. She stood up, pacing across the room. Do you have any idea how insane this is? Do you have any idea what you've dragged me into? Yes, Andrian said quietly. I do. She stopped, turning to stare at him. Something in his tone made her stomach drop. What does that mean? He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. When I married you, I wasn't just giving you a weapon against Roman and Celeste. I was also giving myself protection. Protection from what? From the investigation. A wife can't be compelled to testify against her husband. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. You used me. No, you used me, she repeated, her voice rising. You stood on that sidewalk and you made it sound like you were giving me a choice. Like you were offering me a way to fight back. But this whole time, you were just looking for someone to hide behind. That's not true. Isn't it? She was shaking now, fury and betrayal warring inside her chest. That's why you needed to get married so fast. That's why you couldn't wait 9 days like you originally said. The FBI must be closing in, and you needed a wife before they could bring charges. Serafina, don't. She held up a hand, stopping him. Don't say my name. Don't try to explain. Just don't. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Where are you going? Andrian asked. I don't know, she said. Anywhere but here. She made it to the driveway before she realized she didn't have a car. Didn't have anywhere to go. Her apartment was across the city, and she didn't have money for a cab, and her phone was dying, and she was standing in the rain again just like she had been 2 nights ago when this whole nightmare started. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Serafina, leave me alone. I can't do that. She spun around and the fury she'd been holding back finally broke free. You lied to me. You manipulated me. You made me think I was choosing this when really you were just using me as a shield. That's not... Andrian stopped, his jaw working. That's not the only reason I married you. Then what was the other reason? She was crying now, hot, angry tears that mixed with the rain. Tell me. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't walk away right now and never look back. He stared at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw real fear in his eyes. Not the calculated kind. The raw kind. The kind that came from standing on the edge of losing something you hadn't realized you needed. Because you're the first person in 3 years who's looked at me like I'm human, he said quietly. Not a criminal. Not a weapon. Not a ghost. Just human. The words hit her like a fist. She wanted to stay angry. Wanted to hold on to the betrayal and the fury and the sick feeling in her stomach. But standing there in the rain, looking at a man who'd lost his wife and his humanity and was desperately trying to claw back some small piece of both, she couldn't. I can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. I can't be what you need me to be. I'm not asking you to be anything, Andrian said. I'm just asking you not to leave. Why? Because if you leave, Mateo wins. Vincent wins. The FBI wins. Everyone who's trying to destroy us wins. He took a step closer. And because despite everything, I think you want them to lose as much as I do. She did. God help her, she did. She stood there in the rain, water streaming down her face, and realized she'd already crossed too many lines to turn back now. She'd married him. She'd threatened the DeLuca family in front of 15 dangerous men. She'd burned every bridge that might have led her back to her old life. There was no going back. There was only forward. And forward meant standing beside a man who might have killed his first wife, who was definitely using her as protection from a federal investigation, who'd lied to her from the very beginning. If I stay, she said slowly, things change. No more secrets. No more using me without telling me. We're partners, or we're nothing. You understand? Andrian nodded. I understand. And if the FBI comes after you, I'm not going down with you. I'll testify if I have to. Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or resignation. Fair enough. She took a breath. Let it out. Made the choice that would define everything that came after. Fine, she said. I'll stay. But Andrian? She looked him dead in the eye. If you ever lie to me again, I'll destroy you myself, and I won't need the FBI's help to do it. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I believe you. They stood there in the rain for another moment, two people who'd just made a deal with each other that neither of them fully understood yet. Then Andrian turned and walked back toward the house. Serafina followed. And somewhere in the city, in an office downtown, Special Agent Lisa Cordova sat at her desk and smiled, because she'd just done exactly what she'd set out to do. She'd planted the seed of doubt, and now all she had to do was wait for it to grow. 3 weeks passed like a held breath waiting to be released. Serafina moved through the estate like a ghost learning how to haunt. She slept in the guest room down the hall from Andrian's bedroom, kept her clothes in a closet that still smelled faintly of lavender and someone else's perfume, and spent her days teaching herself how to be married to a man she didn't trust. The ring on her finger felt heavy, wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. The FBI agent's card sat in her nightstand drawer. She looked at it every morning and told herself she wouldn't call. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But the weight of that choice pressed against her ribs every time she took a breath. Andrian kept his distance. They ate breakfast together in a kitchen that echoed with silence, discussed strategy in his study like business partners reviewing quarterly reports, and at night they retreated to opposite ends of the house without saying goodnight. It was exactly what she'd asked for. No secrets, no lies, just cold professional distance. But it felt like dying slowly. like watching something that might have been real shrivel up and turn to ash before it ever had a chance to catch fire. The organization was fracturing. She could see it in the faces of the men who came through the house for meetings, in the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, in the whispers that followed her down hallways. Mateo had been busy, planting doubt, spreading poison, making it clear that Andrian's new wife was a liability they couldn't afford. Two of the captains had already switched their loyalty. A third was wavering. Andrian spent hours on the phone every night, his voice low and controlled, putting out fires that kept springing up faster than he could contain them. The lines around his eyes deepened. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. She watched him burn himself down to nothing and didn't know how to stop it. On the 23rd day of their marriage, everything changed. Serafina was in the study going through files Andrian had finally agreed to let her see. Financial records, contracts, documents that proved the Moretti organization was more legitimate than anyone realized. Most of what they did was legal now: property management, import-export, investments. The criminal empire Andrian's father had built was slowly being dismantled, restructured into something cleaner. It was why Mateo hated him, why the old guard wanted him gone. He was trying to go legitimate, and that terrified everyone who'd gotten rich off blood money. She was 3 hours deep in spreadsheets when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it without thinking. Hello? Serafina Vale? A woman's voice. Professional. Cold. Moretti? Serafina corrected automatically. Who is this? This is Mercy General Hospital. Your father was brought into the emergency room 40 minutes ago. He's asking for you. The world tilted sideways. Her father, Carlos Val, retired police officer. The man who'd raised her alone after her mother left when she was 8. The man who'd taught her how to throw a punch and balance a checkbook and never take shit from anyone. The man who'd refused to meet Andrian, who told her 3 weeks ago over the phone that she was making the biggest mistake of her life. What happened? She managed. He was in a car accident. Ma'am, you need to come now. The line went dead. Serafina was running before she made the conscious decision to move. She found Andrian in his office, paperwork spread across his desk, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up when she burst through the door, and whatever he saw in her face made him end the call immediately. What's wrong? My father, hospital, car accident, I need... She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't breathe past the panic clawing up her throat. Andrian was already grabbing his coat. Which hospital? Mercy General. Let's go. The drive took 23 minutes. Serafina counted everyone. She sat in the passenger seat with her hands clenched in her lap, her nails digging crescents into her palms, her mind cycling through every worst-case scenario. Head trauma, internal bleeding, spinal damage. The nurse's voice on the phone had been too calm, too professional. That was never good. That meant they were trained not to tell you over the phone that someone you loved was dying. Andrian didn't try to comfort her, didn't say it would be okay. He just drove faster and kept one hand on the gear shift in a way that suggested if anyone got in their way, he'd run them off the goddamn road. The emergency room was chaos, fluorescent lights, antiseptic smell, people bleeding and crying and arguing with nurses at the intake desk. Serafina pushed through it all until she found someone who could tell her where Carlos Val was. Room 347, 3rd floor, ICU. She took the stairs because waiting for an elevator would have killed her. The ICU was quieter, sterile, the kind of quiet that made you want to scream just to prove you were still alive. A nurse led her to a room at the end of the hall, and through the window she could see him. Carlos Valle looked small in the hospital bed. That was the first thing that hit her. Small and gray and hooked up to more machines than she could count. His face was bruised, swollen on one side. There was a bandage wrapped around his head and another across his chest. An IV drip fed into his arm. A monitor beeped steadily beside him, tracking a heartbeat that sounded too slow. Serafina pushed open the door on legs that didn't feel attached to her body anymore. Dad? His eyes opened, took a moment to focus. Then something like relief flooded his face. Mija. She was at his bedside before she realized she'd moved. Her hand found his, careful of the IV, careful of the bruises, and held on like he might disappear if she let go. What happened? Someone ran me off the road. His voice was rough, weak. Black SUV. Came out of nowhere on Lakeshore Drive, rammed into my back fender, sent me into the median barrier. Cold dread settled in her stomach. Did you see who it was? No, tinted windows, but Sarah... He paused, wincing. This wasn't an accident. What do you mean? I mean they waited until I was alone. Isolated stretch of road, no other cars around. This was a hit. His hand tightened on hers. Someone tried to kill me, and I think you know why. She did know. She knew exactly why. This was a message. A warning. Someone in Andrian's world had just told her that if she didn't back down, they'd hurt the people she loved. I'm going to fix this, she said, her voice shaking. No. Carlos's eyes were hard despite the pain. You're going to get the hell away from Andrian Moretti before someone else you love ends up in a hospital. Or worse. I can't. Yes, you can. Whatever revenge you thought you were getting, whatever game you thought you were playing, it's over. These people don't play games, Sarah. They end them. Behind her, she heard the door open. She didn't have to turn around to know it was Andrian. Carlos saw him, and his expression went cold. Get out. Mr. Vale, get the hell out of my room before I have security remove you. Andrian's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. I'm sorry this happened. Sorry? Carlos tried to sit up, gasped in pain, fell back against the pillows. You're sorry? My daughter married you 3 weeks ago, and now someone tried to murder me. You think sorry is going to fix that? Dad, stop, Serafina started. No. Carlos looked at her, and his eyes were bright with anger and fear and something that looked like grief. I told you not to do this. I told you marrying him was a mistake. But you didn't listen. You never listen. And now look what happened. This isn't Andrian's fault. The hell it isn't. Carlos turned back to Andrian. You brought her into your world. You made her a target. And if you had any decency at all, you'd let her go before she ends up like your first wife. The words landed like bullets. Andrian's face went blank, empty. The same expression he'd had when Agent Cordova had accused him of murder. I'll wait outside, he said quietly. He left without another word. The silence he left behind felt suffocating. That was cruel, Serafina said finally. It was the truth. Carlos closed his eyes, exhausted. Mija, please. I'm asking you as your father. Walk away from this man before it's too late. I can't. Why not? Because she'd signed papers. Because walking away now would mean Mateo won, and Vincent DeLuca won, and Roman and Celeste got to keep their perfect lives while she went back to being nobody. Because she'd already burned too many bridges and made too many enemies and crossed too many lines. Because despite everything, the lies, the manipulation, the danger, some part of her still believed Andrian Moretti was the only person in this city who saw her as something other than a victim. I just can't, she said. Carlos looked at her for a long moment, and the disappointment in his eyes was worse than any injury he'd sustained in the crash. Then I can't help you anymore. Dad, go, he said, turning his face away. Just go. She wanted to argue, wanted to stay, wanted to make him understand. But the machines were beeping faster now, and a nurse was coming through the door telling her visiting hours were over and Mr. Vale needed to rest. So she left. She found Andrian in the waiting room, standing near a window that overlooked the parking lot. His hands were in his pockets. His shoulders were rigid. He didn't turn around when she approached. We need to find out who did this, she said. I already know who did it. Who? Mateo. His voice was flat, dead. He's trying to break you, trying to make you leave. Because as long as we're married, I have protection from the FBI. But if you walk away... He finally turned to look at her. If you walk away, I lose everything. So what do we do? We end this. He pulled out his phone, typed something, then put it away. I just called a meeting tomorrow night. Every captain, every soldier, everyone who's been sitting on the fence waiting to see which way this breaks. We force Mateo's hand, we make him show himself, and then we bury him. That's insane. That's survival. She stared at him, trying to read his expression, but his face was locked down tight. You're going to start a war. The war already started, Andrian said. The second Mateo went after your father. The second he decided you were an acceptable casualty. Now, we finish it. And if we lose? We won't. How can you be sure? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his eyes were harder than she'd ever seen them. Because I'm not letting him take anything else from me. Not my organization, not my family, and not my wife. The word wife hit different this time. Not like a contract, not like a weapon, like something that actually meant something. I need to go back to the estate, she said. I need to think. Take the car. I'll stay here for a while. Make sure your father's protected. He doesn't want your protection. He's getting it anyway. She didn't argue. She was too tired, too scared, too everything. The drive back to Lake Forest passed in a blur. When she got to the estate, Elena took one look at her face and brought her tea she didn't drink and food she couldn't eat. Serafina sat in the study staring at the files she'd been reading before the phone call that changed everything. Her phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. This is just the beginning. Walk away now or the next one dies. Her blood went cold. Another message came through. This one was a photo. Celeste DeLuca now, walking out of a boutique downtown. The photo was taken from across the street, close enough to be threatening, close enough to make the message clear. We can get to anyone. Serafina's hands started shaking. They were threatening Celeste, the woman who'd destroyed her, the woman she'd spent the last 3 weeks planning how to ruin. And now someone was using Celeste as leverage to get to her. The cruelty of it was almost beautiful. She called Andrian. He picked up on the first ring. They just sent me a photo of Celeste, she said, her voice tight. They're threatening her. Silence on the other end. Then, Mateo's trying to make you choose. Your revenge or your conscience. I don't care about Celeste. Yes, you do, Andrian said quietly. You hate her, but you're not the kind of person who lets innocent people die just to settle a score. He was right. She hated that he was right. What do I do? She asked. You call her, you warn her, and then you let me handle the rest. Andrian, trust me, he said. For once, just trust me. She hung up, stared at her phone, pulled up Celeste's number, still saved in her contacts because she'd never had the strength to delete it. Her finger hovered over the call button. This was the woman who'd slept with Roman for 7 months while pretending to be Serafina's friend. The woman who'd cried and apologized and then married him anyway. The woman who represented everything Serafina had lost. And now Serafina was about to save her life. She hit call. Celeste answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Hello? It's Serafina. Pause. Oh, I didn't expect to hear from you. Listen to me very carefully, Serafina said, her voice cold and controlled. Someone is threatening to hurt you because of me. You need to go somewhere safe, now. What? Sarah, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that there's a photo of you leaving a boutique on Michigan Avenue 20 minutes ago. I'm talking about the fact that someone just sent me that photo along with a threat. I'm talking about the fact that you need to call Roman and tell him to get you off the streets immediately. Celeste's breath hitched. Is this a joke? Do I sound like I'm joking? Silence. Then quieter. Why are you warning me? Because despite everything you did to me, I'm not going to let you die. Sarah, don't. Don't thank me. Don't apologize again. Just get somewhere safe and stay there until this is over. She hung up before Celeste could respond. Then she collapsed into the chair and put her head in her hands and tried very hard not to scream. The meeting was set for midnight the following night. Location, a warehouse on the south side that Moretti Shipping used for storage. Neutral ground. Big enough to hold everyone. Isolated enough that if things went wrong, the police wouldn't show up until it was too late. Serafina spent the day preparing. She read through every file Andrian had, memorized names, studied faces, learned which captains were loyal and which ones were waiting for an excuse to switch sides. She called her father at the hospital. He didn't pick up. She tried again and again. Finally, a nurse told her Carlos Valle had requested no visitors or calls from Serafina Moretti. The rejection hurt more than the car accident. By 11 p.m., she was dressed in black pants and a dark sweater that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Maybe she was. Funerals and wars looked pretty similar when you got down to it. Andrian found her in the foyer, pacing. You don't have to come, he said. Yes, I do. This could get violent. I know. Mateo's going to be there. He's going to try to provoke you, try to make you break. Let him try. Andrian studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something small and heavy. A gun. He held it out to her. Take it. She stared at the weapon. I don't know how to use that. Safety here. Point, shoot. It's not complicated. Andrian, take it, he said again, his voice harder. Because if things go wrong tonight, I need to know you can protect yourself. Her hand closed around the grip. The metal was cold, heavy, wrong. She'd never held a gun before, never wanted to. But standing there in the foyer of a house that belonged to a dead woman, about to walk into a warehouse full of criminals who'd probably love to see her dead, she tucked it into her waistband and hoped to God she'd never have to use it. The warehouse was exactly as grim as she'd imagined. Concrete floors, metal rafters, flickering lights that made everything look like a horror movie. 23 men were already there when they arrived, standing in clusters, talking in low voices that stopped the second Andrian walked through the door. Mateo was waiting near the back, leaning against a support beam with his arms crossed, and a smile on his face that made Serafina want to hit him. Brother, he said, pushing off the beam. And the lovely Mrs. Moretti, how domestic. Let's get this over with, Andrian said. Eager to get home? Mateo's smile widened. Or eager to find out how many of these men still believe you're fit to lead. I called this meeting to address the rumors you've been spreading, Andrian said, his voice carrying across the warehouse. To settle this once and for all. Settle what? Mateo spread his hands. I'm just asking questions everyone else is too afraid to ask. Like why you married a stranger, why you're restructuring the organization without consulting the captains, why your first wife died under such convenient circumstances. Careful, Andrian said quietly. Or what? Mateo took a step forward. You'll kill me too? Add me to the list? One of the captains, the gray-haired man from the boardroom meeting, cleared his throat. Mateo, that's enough. Is it? Mateo turned to address the room. Isabella Moretti was going to testify against this organization, against all of us, and then she died. And now Andrian's married to another outsider, a woman with no loyalty to this family, a woman who, according to my sources, has been cooperating with the FBI. The room went dead silent. Serafina felt every pair of eyes turn toward her. That's a lie, she said, her voice steady. Is it? Mateo pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, then held it up. Because this is a photo of you talking to Special Agent Lisa Cordova outside this very estate 3 days ago. The photo showed Serafina standing near the gates, Agent Cordova's card in her hand. It had been taken with a telephoto lens from across the street. The angle made it look like they were having a friendly conversation instead of what had actually happened. Cordova showing up uninvited and Serafina telling her to leave. She came to me, Serafina said. I told her to get lost. Did you? Mateo's smile was poison. Or did you take her card? Did you save her number? Did you make a deal to save yourself when this all comes crashing down? I didn't make a deal. Then prove it, Mateo said. Show us your phone. Show us you don't have her contact information saved. It was a trap. If she refused, they'd assume she was guilty. If she showed them the phone, they'd see Agent Cordova's card was still in her possession, see the contact information, and that would be enough to convict her in their eyes. She looked at Andrian. He was staring at Mateo with an expression that could have melted steel. This is bullshit, one of the captains muttered. Is it? Mateo turned to him. Or is it the truth you've all been too afraid to acknowledge? Andrian's judgment is compromised. His wife is a liability. And if we don't act now, we're all going to prison. Enough. Andrian's voice cracked across the warehouse like a whip. You want to challenge me for leadership? Fine. Let's do this the old way, you and me. Right now. Mateo's smile faltered. Just for a second. Then it was back, sharper than before. You really want to do this? I really want to end this. The warehouse had gone completely silent. Even the wind outside seemed to be holding its breath. Mateo unbuttoned his jacket slowly, deliberately. All right, brother, let's finish what father started. Two of the men stepped forward, clearing a space in the center of the warehouse. This was how leadership disputes were settled in the old days. Not with votes, not with lawyers, but with violence. Winner takes control. Loser takes a body bag. Serafina's heart was slamming against her ribs. Andrian, stay back, he said quietly, shrugging out of his coat. Matteo was already moving, his fists up, his stance balanced. He was younger than Andrian, faster, less weighed down by grief and guilt, and 3 years of barely sleeping. The first punch came fast. Andrian blocked it, barely. Countered with a jab that caught Matteo in the ribs. Matteo grunted, stumbled back, then came forward again with a combination that was all speed and rage. One hit landed, a solid crack against Andrian's jaw that snapped his head sideways. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. The men around them started shouting, placing bets, calling out encouragement. It was savage, primal, like watching wolves fight over a carcass. Andrian recovered, drove his shoulder into Matteo's chest, sent them both crashing into a stack of pallets. Wood splintered. Matteo's head bounced off concrete. He rolled sideways, came up with something in his hand. A knife. "No weapons!" one of the captains shouted. But Matteo wasn't listening. He lunged forward, the blade aimed at Andrian's throat. Andrian caught his wrist. Twisted. The knife clattered to the floor. Then Andrian's fist connected with Matteo's face once, twice, 3 times. The sound was wet, brutal. Matteo went down hard, blood pouring from his nose. Andrian stood over him, breathing hard, his knuckles split open and dripping. "It's over," he said. "You lost." Matteo laughed, a broken wheezing sound. "Did I?" Then everything went to hell. The warehouse doors exploded inward. Armed men poured through. Not FBI, not police, something else entirely. Black tactical gear, automatic weapons. They moved like professionals, spreading out to cover every exit. And in the chaos that followed, Serafina couldn't tell if they were Matteo's people or Vincent DeLuca's or someone else entirely. Someone screamed. Someone else dove for cover. Gunfire erupted. Short, controlled bursts that sent ricochets screaming off metal rafters. Andrian was moving before Serafina could process what was happening. He grabbed her arm, dragged her behind a concrete support column as bullets tore through the space where they'd been standing. "Stay down!" he shouted. But she wasn't staying down. She was pulling the gun from her waistband with shaking hands, trying to remember what he'd told her. Safety. Point. Shoot. One of the armed men rounded the column. Serafina didn't think. She just raised the gun and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly broke her wrist. The sound was deafening. The bullet went wide, punching through drywall somewhere to her left. But it was enough to make the man duck back behind cover. Andrian was returning fire now, his shots precise and controlled. 2 of the attackers went down. A third stumbled, clutching his shoulder. The warehouse had turned into a war zone, smoke and noise and the smell of cordite thick enough to choke on. "We need to move!" Andrian grabbed her hand. They ran, through the warehouse, past bodies and overturned crates and men scrambling for weapons. Serafina's legs burned, her lungs burned. She couldn't hear anything except her own pulse thundering in her ears and the crack of gunfire behind them. They burst through a side door into an alley. More gunfire. Closer this time. Andrian shoved her toward the Phantom parked at the far end. "Get in the car!" She ran, heard him behind her, heard something whistle past her head. A bullet, she realized distantly. Someone just shot at her. And then Andrian was in front of her, pushing her down, his body covering hers as glass exploded from the car window. "Are you hit?" he demanded. "No. Are you?" "Not yet." He got the door open, shoved her inside, dove in after her. The engine roared to life. Tires screamed against asphalt. They fishtailed out of the alley as more bullets punched through the back windshield. Serafina couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get her seatbelt fastened. Blood was running down her arm. Not hers, she realized. Andrian's. He'd been hit after all. "You're bleeding," she said, her voice too high. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. I'm fine." He took a corner too fast, the tires barely holding the road. "We need to get off the streets. They'll be looking for this car." "Where do we go?" "I don't know yet." He looked at her, and his eyes were wild, desperate. "But we can't go back to the estate. We can't go anywhere they'd expect. We're out of safe places, Serafina. We're out of options." She looked at him, really looked at him, blood on his face, his shirt torn, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. This man who'd promised her revenge, who'd offered her power, who dragged her into a war she hadn't fully understood until bullets started flying. And she realized something that should have terrified her but didn't. She wasn't afraid, she was furious. Then we make new options, she said. How? We stop running. We stop reacting. We go after them first. Serafina, I'm done playing defense, she interrupted, her voice hard. They went after my father. They threatened Celeste. They just tried to kill us both in a warehouse full of witnesses. Enough. We end this tonight. We find whoever's pulling the strings and we burn their whole world down. Andrian stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Then his mouth curved into something sharp and dangerous. All right, he said. Let's go to war. He pulled the car over, made 3 phone calls. The first to his remaining loyal captains. The second to someone Serafina didn't recognize. The third to a number he had memorized but had never called before. When he hung up, his face was set in stone. I just declared war on Vincent DeLuca, he said, and I made a deal with the one person I swore I'd never work with again. Who? My father's old partner, the man who helped build this organization before Andrian Sr. died. He's been retired for 5 years, lives in Miami, hates my guts. He looked at her, but he hates Mateo more, and he owes me a favor. What kind of favor? The kind that ends with Vincent DeLuca in a federal prison and Mateo in a grave. The words should have shocked her, should have made her recoil, but instead she felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest, something that felt disturbingly like satisfaction. How long do we have? She asked. 48 hours, Andrian said. After that, either we've won or we're both dead. She looked down at her hands. They were still shaking, still covered in Andrian's blood. The gun was still in her lap. 2 days ago, she'd been a woman trying to figure out how to be married, how to rebuild a life from the pieces Roman and Celeste had left behind. Now she was a woman planning a war. And the most terrifying part was how natural it felt. Then let's not waste time, she said. Andrian put the car in drive. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Vincent DeLuca's phone rang with news that would change everything. The war had begun, and nobody was walking away clean. They drove through the city like ghosts fleeing daylight, the phantom's bullet-riddled body drawing stares from late-night pedestrians who knew better than to look too long. Andrian's shoulder was still bleeding, the dark stain spreading across his shirt in a shape that reminded Serafina of the wine Roman had spilled on her dress the night he told her he was leaving. Some stains never washed out, some wounds never stopped bleeding. They ended up at a motel on the edge of the city, the kind of place that took cash and didn't ask questions. Andrian paid for a room on the second floor while Serafina kept pressure on his shoulder with a jacket that was already ruined. Inside, the room smelled like cigarettes and defeat. One bed, one bathroom, a television bolted to the wall like someone might steal it. Sit down, she said, pushing him toward the bed. I'm fine. Sit down. He sat. She found towels in the bathroom, ran water until it was hot enough to scald, and came back to find him trying to peel his shirt off one-handed. The fabric was stuck to the wound. He hissed when she helped him, the sound raw and animal. Bullet went through, he said, looking at his shoulder. That's good. Means we don't have to dig it out. That's your definition of good? You'd be surprised how relative that word becomes. She cleaned the wound as gently as she could, but there was no gentle way to do this. He didn't make a sound, just sat there with his jaw clenched and his eyes fixed on the wall like he could will himself somewhere else. When she was finished, she wrapped it with strips torn from the cleanest towel she could find. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would hold long enough. Your turn, he said when she was done. I'm not hurt. You have glass in your hair. He reached up, his fingers finding a shard she hadn't known was there. When he pulled it free, there was blood on his fingertips. From the car window. She sat down beside him on the bed. Let him check her scalp with hands that were surprisingly gentle for someone who'd just beaten his brother half to death in a warehouse. He found 3 more pieces of glass, each one smaller than her fingernail, each one sharp enough to have killed her if it had landed 2 inches to the left. We're alive, she said finally, the words tasting strange in her mouth. For now. What happens next? Andrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired, older than it had been 48 hours ago. We wait for my father's old partner to come through with the information he promised. Bank records showing Vincent DeLuca's been embezzling from his own organization for years. Proof that Matteo's been working with him to destabilize the Moretti family so they can divide the territory between them. And if he doesn't come through, then we run. Far and fast. And we never stop running. She thought about that. Thought about spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Thought about becoming the kind of person who slept with a gun under her pillow and never stayed in one place long enough to remember the address. I don't want to run, she said. Neither do I. His phone buzzed. He checked it, and something in his expression changed. It's done. He sent the files. To who? Everyone. The FBI. The Tribune. Every captain in the organization. Every person who needs to see what Vincent and Matteo have been doing. He looked at her, and his eyes were harder than she'd ever seen them. By morning, Vincent DeLuca will be under federal investigation, and Matteo will be a dead man walking. Just like that? Just like that. She wanted to feel relief, wanted to feel victory, but all she felt was hollow, empty, like someone had taken everything inside her chest and scraped it clean. We should sleep, Andrian said. Tomorrow's going to be worse. How could it possibly be worse? Because tomorrow, we have to clean up the bodies. He stood, moved toward the bathroom. She heard water running, heard him moving around. When he came back out, he'd washed the blood off his hands, but his face still looked like he'd gone 3 rounds with someone twice his size. Take the bed, he said. I'll sleep in the chair. Don't be stupid. You're injured. You need the bed more than I do. Serafina, just shut up and lie down. He did. Not because he wanted to, because he was too tired to argue. She turned off the light and lay down on the other side of the bed, as far from him as she could get without falling off. The mattress dipped under their combined weight. She could hear him breathing in the darkness, could feel the heat radiating off his body. I'm sorry, he said after a long silence. For what? For all of it. For dragging you into this. For using you. For not being honest from the beginning. She stared at the ceiling. You think apologizing makes it better? No, but I need you to know I regret it. Regret doesn't change what happened. I know. They lay there in silence for a while. Then quieter. Andrian? Yeah? Did you love her? Isabella? His breath caught. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, more than I knew how to survive losing. Is that why you helped her die? I helped her die because she asked me to. Because watching her suffer was worse than losing her. Because sometimes love means letting go, even when every part of you is screaming to hold on tighter. He paused. But yeah, losing her broke something in me I don't think will ever heal. And me? The question came out before she could stop it. What am I to you? He turned his head on the pillow, and even in the darkness she could feel his eyes on her. You're the first person since Isabella who's made me remember what it feels like to want to protect something instead of just destroy it. The words hit harder than they should have, deeper than she wanted them to. That's not love, she said. No, he agreed. But it might be the beginning of something that could become it, if we survive long enough. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Just lay there listening to him breathe until exhaustion finally dragged her under. She dreamed of fire again, but this time Andrian was standing in the flames beside her, and neither of them was running. Morning came with a phone call that changed everything. Agent Cordova's voice was crisp and professional when Serafina answered. Mrs. Moretti, I think it's time we had a conversation. I have nothing to say to you. Then listen. Vincent DeLuca was arrested an hour ago. Federal agents hit his penthouse at dawn with warrants for racketeering, money laundering, and about 15 other charges I won't bore you with. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Cordova paused. Your husband's files were very thorough. Serafina sat up, her heart pounding. Beside her, Andrian was already awake, watching her face. What about Matteo? Dead. Someone put 3 bullets in him outside his apartment building around 5 this morning. Professional job. No witnesses, no cameras. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. The room tilted. I think someone cleaned up a problem before we could arrest him, Cordova said. And I think that someone has a lot of enemies who wanted him gone. Could have been anyone. Could have been your husband. Could have been one of the captains who realized Matteo was poison. Could have been Vincent's people tying up loose ends. Another pause. But here's the thing, Mrs. Moretti. I don't actually care who killed Matteo Moretti. What I care about is that your husband's organization is falling apart, and I care about making sure you're not caught in the crossfire when it does. Why do you care what happens to me? Because despite what you think, I'm not a monster. I'm just someone trying to stop dangerous people from hurting innocent ones. And I think you started out innocent before Andrian Moretti got his hooks in you. He didn't. Save it. I've heard it before. Every wife of every criminal I've ever investigated says the same thing. He's not what you think. He's changed. He's going legitimate. And then one day she wakes up and realizes she's an accessory to crimes she can't even pronounce. Cordova's voice softened slightly. I'm offering you a way out. Come work with us. Tell us everything you know about the Moretti organization. And when this is over, you walk away clean. Serafina looked at Andrian. His face was unreadable, but something in his eyes looked like resignation, like he'd been expecting this, like he'd always known it would end with her having to choose. I need to think about it, she said. You have 24 hours, Cordova said. After that, the offer expires. The line went dead. Serafina set the phone down slowly, her hand shaking. She wants me to testify against you. I know. She says you're going down whether I help or not. She's probably right. And you're okay with that? Andrian stood up, moving to the window. His shoulder was still wrapped in makeshift bandages, his shirt still stained with dried blood. He looked like someone who'd survived a war, but lost everything worth fighting for. I'm okay with you making whatever choice lets you sleep at night, he said finally. If that means testifying, then testify. If it means walking away and pretending you never knew me, then walk away. I won't stop you. Just like that. Just like that. She stood up, crossed the room until she was standing beside him. Outside, the city was waking up. Cars on the highway, people heading to jobs they hated, lives being lived by people who had no idea what had happened in a warehouse last night. What if I don't want to walk away? She asked quietly. He turned to look at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw real surprise in his eyes. Why wouldn't you? Because I'm tired of being the woman who runs when things get hard. I'm tired of letting other people decide what my life looks like. And I'm tired of pretending I didn't choose this. She took a breath. I chose to get in your car that night. I chose to marry you. I chose to stand beside you in that boardroom and threaten Vincent DeLuca. Nobody forced me. Nobody manipulated me. I made those choices. And I'm not going to pretend now that I was some helpless victim who didn't know what she was doing. Serafina, I'm not finished. You used me. You lied to me. You dragged me into a war I barely understood. But you also saw me when everyone else in this city had decided I was invisible. You gave me a weapon when I was drowning, and you never once treated me like I was broken. She paused, her voice catching. So no, I'm not testifying against you. I'm not walking away. I'm staying. And if that makes me an accessory or a criminal or whatever the hell Agent Cordova thinks it makes me, then fine. I'd rather be a criminal who chose her own path than a victim who let everyone else choose for her. Andrian stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then, very quietly, "You're insane." "Probably. The FBI is going to come after you too. Let them. You could lose everything. Your law license, your freedom. Your father might never speak to you again." "I know." He reached out, his hand cupping her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met. You say that like it's a bad thing. It's the thing that's going to keep you alive." Then he kissed her. It wasn't soft, wasn't gentle. It was desperate and hungry and tasted like blood and coffee, and something that might have been hope, if hope wasn't such a dangerous thing to feel. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in his ruined shirt, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, she felt something other than anger or fear or hollow emptiness. She felt alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Andrian rested his forehead against hers. "We should leave Chicago," he said. "Start over somewhere else. Somewhere the FBI can't find us. And go where? I don't know. Somewhere warm. Somewhere we can build something new. That sounds like running. It is running. I thought you didn't want to run. I don't, he said. But I also don't want to spend the rest of my life in federal prison. And if we stay here, that's where we're both going to end up. She thought about that. Thought about Chicago. Thought about Roman and Celeste and her father and everyone who'd decided she wasn't worth remembering. Thought about the woman she'd been a month ago, small and scared and so desperate to be loved that she'd lost herself trying to fit into someone else's life. That woman was dead. And the woman standing here now didn't need Chicago anymore. Okay, she said, let's run. They left that afternoon, packed one bag each, emptied the cash from the safe in Andrian's office, made arrangements for Elena and the rest of the staff to be taken care of. Andrian signed documents transferring ownership of the legitimate businesses to his most trusted captain, a man named Torres who'd been with the family for 30 years and had no interest in the criminal side of things. What about the rest of it? Serafina asked. The organization. It'll fracture, Andrian said. Without Vincent DeLuca and Matteo, there's no one left to fight. The captains will split the territory among themselves. Some will go legitimate, some won't. But it's not my problem anymore. Just like that? Just like that. They drove to the hospital first. Serafina needed to see her father one more time, needed to say goodbye even if he didn't want to hear it. Carlos Val was sitting up in bed when she walked into his room, looking thinner and older than he had 2 days ago. His eyes went hard when he saw her. I told them I didn't want visitors, he said. I know, I came anyway. She stood at the foot of the bed, her hands shoved in her coat pockets. I'm leaving Chicago. I wanted you to hear it from me. Leaving with him, you mean? Yes. Carlos was quiet for a long moment. Then, I can't stop you. No, you can't. But I can tell you you're making a mistake. I can tell you that running doesn't solve anything. I can tell you that one day you're going to wake up and realize the life you built with that man is just a prettier version of the cage Roman kept you in. Maybe, Serafina said, or maybe I'll wake up and realize I finally stopped letting other people tell me who I'm supposed to be. That's not freedom, mija. That's just trading one prison for another. Then it's a prison I chose. Carlos looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression cracked. You were supposed to be better than this, smarter than this. I am better than this, she said quietly. I'm just not better than him, and I've stopped pretending that's a flaw. She turned to leave, stopped at the door, looked back at her father one last time. I love you, Dad. Even if you can't love me back anymore. She walked out before he could respond. Andrian was waiting in the hall, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He didn't ask how it went. Didn't need to. He just fell into step beside her, and they walked out of the hospital together. The Phantom was waiting at the curb, bullet holes patched with duct tape, windows replaced with plastic sheeting. It looked like something that had survived a war, which Serafina supposed it had. Where to? Andrian asked as they pulled away from the hospital. Anywhere but here. They drove south, out of Chicago, through Indiana, into Kentucky. They stopped at a gas station in a town whose name Serafina didn't bother learning and filled up the tank with cash. Andrian went inside to pay while she stood in the parking lot watching the sun sink below the horizon. Her phone buzzed. Text message. Unknown number. She opened it. I know what you did. I know you chose him. And one day, that choice is going to destroy you. L. Cordova. Serafina read it twice. Then she deleted the message, pulled the battery out of the phone, and threw the whole thing in a trash can. When Andrian came back out, he noticed immediately. What did you just throw away? My old life. He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Good. It didn't fit you anyway. They got back in the car and kept driving. Usamk. They ended up in a small coastal town in South Carolina 3 days later. The kind of place where nobody asked questions and everyone minded their own business. Andrian paid cash for a house 2 blocks from the ocean, small, weathered, with a porch that looked out over water that stretched forever. It took them 2 weeks to settle in, to learn how to live like normal people, to wake up without checking for weapons, to sleep without dreaming of gunfire. Serafina got a job at a local law clinic helping people who couldn't afford real lawyers. Andrian started a consulting business that was vague enough nobody looked too closely at what he was actually consulting about. They bought groceries, argued about which brand of coffee to buy, learned each other's habits and quirks, and all the tiny annoying things that came with sharing space with another human being. It was boring. It was mundane. It was the most peaceful thing Serafina had ever experienced. One evening, about 6 weeks after they'd left Chicago, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Andrian's phone rang. He looked at the screen, frowned, then answered. "Torres, what's wrong?" Serafina watched his face as he listened, watched his expression shift from neutral to surprised to something that looked almost like grief. He hung up a few minutes later, set the phone down, and stared out at the ocean. "What happened?" she asked. "Roman DeLuca," Andrian said quietly. "He and Celeste were killed in a car accident 2 days ago. Drunk driver ran a red light, hit them head on, killed them both instantly." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Serafina waited for the feeling to hit, the satisfaction, the vindication, the sense that justice had finally been served. But it didn't come. All she felt was tired. "Does that make you happy?" Andrian asked. "No," she said honestly. "It doesn't make me anything. They were just people, flawed and selfish and human, and now they're dead. And all that anger I carried around for so long," she trailed off, trying to find the words. "It doesn't mean anything anymore. It never did." Then what did? She thought about that. Thought about the woman she'd been standing in the rain outside the Blackstone ballroom. Thought about the choices she'd made, the lines she'd crossed, the life she'd burned down to build something new. "Choosing myself," she said finally. "That's what mattered. Not revenge, not proving anything to anyone. Just choosing myself for once." Andrian reached over, his hand finding hers. They sat like that as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and gold. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Any of it?" "Some of it, not all of it, not this." "This?" "Us. Here. The boring, ordinary life we're building." He smiled. A real smile. The kind that actually reached his eyes. "I never thought I'd get boring and ordinary again." "Is it what you wanted?" "It's what I needed," he said. "There's a difference." The weeks turned into months. Summer arrived, thick and humid, and they spent their days working and their evenings on the porch watching storms roll in off the ocean. They didn't talk about Chicago, didn't talk about the FBI or Vincent DeLuca or the bodies they'd left behind. It felt like a different life, a different version of themselves that had existed in some other universe. Then one afternoon, Serafina came home from the law clinic to find a letter sitting on the kitchen table. No return address, postmarked from Chicago. She opened it with hands that had started shaking before she even realized why. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, her father's writing. "Mija, I've spent the last 3 months trying to hate you for what you did, for choosing him over your family, for throwing away everything you could have been. But the truth is, I don't hate you. I'm just afraid for you. Afraid that one day you'll realize the price you paid was too high. Afraid that one day you'll need your father and I won't be there because I was too stubborn to forgive you. So I'm writing this to tell you that I do forgive you. I don't understand your choices. I don't agree with them. But you're still my daughter. You'll always be my daughter. And if you ever need to come home, the door is open. But Sarah, don't mistake an open door for approval. I'm keeping it open because I love you, not because I think what you did was right. Stay safe. Stay smart. And try not to become the kind of person who forgets where she came from. Dad." Serafina read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, before she finally folded it and put it in the drawer beside the bed where she kept the few things from her old life she hadn't been able to throw away. When Andrian got home an hour later, he took one look at her face and knew something had changed. "What happened?" "My father wrote to me. And I think maybe someday I'll be able to go back. Not to stay, just to visit. Just to show him I survived." Andrian sat down beside her on the couch, his arm settling around her shoulders. "You did more than survive." "Did I?" Look around, Serafina. Look at what we built. It's not perfect. It's not what either of us planned. But it's ours. And nobody took it from us. Nobody told us who we had to be or what we had to do. We chose this. Every part of it. He was right. They'd chosen this. The boring house 2 blocks from the ocean, the quiet evenings on the porch, the life that didn't include gunfights or revenge or anything dramatic enough to write about. It was small and simple and utterly ordinary, and it was exactly what she'd needed all along. She leaned her head against his shoulder, felt his hand tighten around hers, and let herself breathe. Outside, the ocean kept moving, the sun kept setting, the world kept turning like it always had, like it always would, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out on its surface. And somewhere in that indifference, Serafina found peace. Not the kind that came from winning, not the kind that came from revenge or justice or watching your enemies fall. Just the quiet, unremarkable peace that came from finally learning how to let go. Roman was gone. Celeste was gone. The life she'd thought she wanted was gone. And in its place was something messier, something harder, something real. She'd walked into a ballroom in an emerald dress expecting to witness her own erasure. Instead, she'd walked out with a stranger who'd offered her a choice that sounded insane and dangerous and impossible. And she'd taken it. She'd burned down everything she used to be. Had crossed lines she couldn't uncross. Had become someone her younger self wouldn't recognize. But standing here now, in a small house by the ocean, with a man who'd seen the worst parts of her and stayed anyway, she realized the woman who'd cried in the rain outside that jewelry store had been wrong about one thing. She hadn't needed revenge. She'd needed permission. Permission to be angry. Permission to fight back. Permission to stop being the woman everyone expected her to be and start being the woman she actually was. And once she'd given herself that permission, everything else had followed. The betrayal that once destroyed her had only shattered the smaller version of herself she'd outgrown long before she realized it. And on the coldest night of her life, when a stranger stopped his car beside a lonely sidewalk in Chicago, she'd finally chosen to stop being the woman abandoned at someone else's wedding. She'd chosen to become the woman who decided her own ending. And this, she thought, looking out at the ocean as the last light faded from the sky, this was the ending she'd chosen. Not perfect, not pretty, not the fairy tale she'd imagined when she was young and stupid and thought love was supposed to look a certain way, but hers, completely, irrevocably hers. And that was enough.